Hello, everyone. My name is Waffle or Nick, and I am a history major in college right now. And I am wanting to go to grad school and do my dissertation on the First World War, particularly French soldiers dealing with shell shock. Now, I've done a couple videos reacting to the All Quiet on the Western Front trailers, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to just finish the movie. It is out now on Netflix, and I do recommend going and watching it. It was a brilliant movie, and it did great justice to the book. I'm just going to let you know now, this video has spoilers in it. If you haven't watched the movie yet, read the book, or watched any of the movies, in matter of fact, don't watch this. Go watch the movie, go read the book. Thank you guys. See it. I took a few notes after the fact to try and kind of pin my thoughts on the movie. I thought it was a really brilliant movie. I thought it was greatly made, great production. It was amazing seeing an accurate World War One movie in modern day cinematics. Now, a couple notes that I had here that I kind of want to just go down the list and talk about my reactions. Just first off, like I said before, great movie. I think the producers did amazing. It should end up being one of the better movies that's been on Netflix in a long time. I recommend anyone, even if you're not a fan of history, to go and watch it. Brilliant movie. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, it kicks off at the very beginning of the movie. It's the very first few scenes with the soldier named Heinrich. After he goes down in the field in no man's land, I love the fact that they noted on the refurbishing of uniforms. I thought this was brilliant. Took me a minute to understand what they were doing, and then it finally clicked to me whenever Paul got his uniform. I don't know why it took me that long, because I already knew about this. I knew about them doing this, but I thought that was brilliant. I thought it was a great way to start the movie, kind of hinting at all that, especially whenever the officer drops the name tag off the uniform onto the ground with the other torn off uniform like names. Brilliant. I thought that was amazing. Something else I took notice of was just the great look of weapons. The weapons looked amazing. Outfits looked amazing. Even the 82nd Regiment that Paul had on his shoulders, I thought everything looked good. As far as like having it based off the book, I thought that was pretty well done. I picked up on a few things here and there from the book. Some of the things they took their own liberties on. I thought it was overall great. One of the things they took their own liberty on was the death of Jaden. If I remember correctly from the book, he didn't kill himself with the fork. He actually, you know, if I remember correctly from Erich Maria Remarque's account of Paul, he would just have the leg injury and then would die that night. I don't remember him actually killing himself with a fork. I don't remember Kat dying by a child. I may be wrong. It's been a while since I've read the book. I haven't gotten to reading it again. Like I said, I was wanting to. So if I'm wrong on that, just let me know. I'd have to refresh my mind. Something else I thought was really great to take note of was just the grit. I thought it was amazing. Just the grit of the war. It's one of the better World War One films. It actually shows like just true grittiness. A lot of, I mean, Paul is dirty throughout the most part of the movie. There's maybe like there's only a few scenes where he's not dirty, or any of the soldiers. I like that they take note of the water filling up the trench and the soldiers having to pail the water out. I like the note. I like how they did No Man's Land. The only other movie that I've seen an accurate, good depiction of No Man's Land was War Horse, and I didn't like the movie as much as the book. It's a great book and movie, but of course, you only see No Man's Land like once throughout the entire film. So I thought that was really good. The depiction of just the trenches in general, I like the contrast between the German and the French trenches. Did a really good job with that. Took a good note of the German bunkers, how deep they were. How the French trenches normally were kind of not as superior as the German trenches, but still well made for what a trench is. Something else I wanted to take note of very early in the book, it's actually the first scene where they're first getting artillery dropped on them, is the paranoia of the soldiers. One of the biggest hit points for All Quiet on the Western Front for the book is its accurate portrayal of soldiers and how they react to shell fire, how they react to combat, and the paranoia that comes with it, the uh, trauma that comes with that. And I thought it was really interesting to me just how well the acting was, how well the cinematics were. Just like whenever they're first getting bombarded, when they're in the bunker, and I think can't remember his name, but he starts banging his head against the wall, and I thought that was a brilliant thing. Or whenever the soldiers are trying to get out of the bunker, and he gets hit by an artillery shell. Like, I think it's amazing to see the reaction of these soldiers and how well the acting and cinematography is of how they portrayed these soldiers. I thought it was great. It really picked up on the book very well. If you know anything about the book, that's what it's about. It's showing the true nature of war and how hard that is on an actual person, on a human being. Thought they did it great. As far as Paul goes, I thought they did a great job. The actor for Paul did an amazing job depicting just like trauma, sadness, grief, kind of like a soulless depiction, and it's really well done. It really lines up with the book of what Erich Maria really wanted to shine through. They picked up on the glee aspect, the happiness aspect, the triumphant aspect that so often gets accidentally mixed in with war, with war. It's far too often, we see it before, like when the United States got involved with World War II, people were running to join the war because they're gonna say, "Hey, we're gonna beat them back," and within a month. They did the same thing with World War One. This whole thing of dying with honor, fighting for your country is honorable. And while I agree, fighting for your country is a great thing, it's one of those things where people just don't know the tendencies of war. People don't know the horrors of war, and that's one of those things that they really hit a good job on. That's mentioned in the books. Erich Maria Remarque, shows Paul, and his friends all joining, all happy, and they did a good job of showing that. One of the other things they showed was the depletion of German supplies, um, through stealing animals, through stealing French food. It shows it very early on whenever Paul is just eating a piece of bread that he gets from Kat, and that's the only thing Kat has to eat is that piece of bread. I thought it was very brilliant showing the animal stealing. They did it in the books, but I thought that they did a great job showing it twice. And even the remarks from Paul saying, you'll do whatever you can when you're starving. I thought that was a great thing to add. Another thing, whenever Franz goes and, gets with the women, won't say anything because of YouTube, but, when he goes and gets with the ladies, the French women, and then at the same time, I can't remember who it was. I think wasn't Franz. I can't remember who it was, but he grabbed the poster of the woman, cut it off the board, and he kept it with him. And I thought that was a great scene. Great scenes, great reminders of what war does to men. Because you got to remember that, when you're deprived of these carnal natures, this mentality, it's hard. You're taken away from your wives. You're taken away from women back home. It's kind of, it would have been frowned upon to give yourself pleasure, and I thought that was a great reminders of that. How much war does deteriorate your mental, how much war deteriorates the fact that you're just not getting any pleasure. It's not very much talked about from the war. A lot of people, people want to talk about the food or the actual combat, but nobody wants to talk about what the people are actually missing from daily life. And it's not an uncommon thing for French men or British men or anybody fighting. Whenever they'd go off for leave, they'd go and get with prostitutes in brothels. It was a very known thing to happen. And even with just random women that they would come across in the countryside that they would get with. I thought that was a very cool thing. Something else to note of earlier in the movie when they're in the bunker and they're getting bombarded. Whenever Kat mentions the creeping barrage, I thought that was an amazing detail that they introduced into that, because I don't remember Kat talking about that in the book. However, they did mention it in the movie, which was a tactic that the French came up with, and they explain it perfectly in the book. What it is you'll launch a wave of artillery, your men will move up. You'll launch another wave further out, your men will move up. And you keep doing that until your men can get to the trenches without being alerted. So I thought them mentioning that, I thought them having Kat mention that was amazing. Something else I wanted to talk about was the confusion for tanks. Now, like, you gotta understand, this is 1917 when they see the tanks for the first time. No, it's not. It's late 1918, because this whole movie takes place in the last week of the war. Only the first like maybe 30 minutes of the movie takes place before the last week. So yeah, they see tanks. That's on me. So they see the tanks, but not every soldier has seen a tank. Tanks weren't always deployed, especially Saint Chamons. They were expensive. Tanks in general were expensive. The British produced more tanks than the French, but the French also didn't make too many Saint Chamons. They made more F-17s. Saint Chamond had too many problems, but I like the fact that they showed the Saint Chamond for the French, and I also like the fact that when the Saint Chamond appears, they didn't just appear like one at a time; they were in a group. And the fact that some of the German soldiers who haven't seen tanks up to this point, because like I said before, tanks weren't deployed in every sector. I love the fact that some of the soldiers just didn't know how to react. I love the fact that they were confused and, just didn't know what was happening. I thought that was a great detail, because you gotta remember, up to this point, nobody's seen a tank. Unless you just have, unless you've been into combat, but most of these soldiers who have been in this sector have not seen a tank yet. I thought that was a great detail to add. A lot of the soldiers freaking out about it. I would freak out. It's understandable. This was huge for me. And this was actual hand-to-hand combat during scenes. It's far too often that we see in World War One films just no hand-to-hand combat. We don't even really see too much combat in general. Like, that was one of my complaints with 1917, was you don't really see combat. 1917 was a great movie, like, in writing. The story was great. Plot was great for 1917. Action, no. The actual cinematics were beautiful, but it was a horrible movie to me because of that. You don't see a lot of combat. You don't see a lot of stuff going on, and so those scenes where Paul is on these trench raids, on these trench charges, getting into hand-to-hand combat with French soldiers, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was great cinematography, choreography. I thought it was amazing. I'm glad they actually showed it. I'm glad they showed people getting hit by bayonets. I'm glad they showed the shovel being used. Or anything, anything. Speaking of hand-to-hand combat, I enjoyed the scene where, I hate to say enjoy, but you understand what I'm saying. I thought it was really good for the movie, and it's in the book, and I thought it was really touching in the book. Really was a heart jerker. Was the scene where Paul is in the shell hole and almost gets shot by the French soldier, but he ends up getting hit by an artillery shell. And then Paul goes up and stabs him multiple times. But then Paul starts freaking out because the soldier's not dying, he's suffering, and he's spitting up blood and he's making noises, and Paul shoves dirt in his mouth. Paul goes and runs away from him and starts like freaking out and crying. And then it makes it worse when Paul goes over to try to treat the wounds of the French soldier by putting on band-aids and stuff and giving him water. The water almost kills him. And then a soldier dies, and Paul is heartbroken because he's just taken a life. And then he also finds the soldier's documents, and there's a picture of his wife in there. And that scares Paul to death. And that was a great scene. I think they depicted it perfectly from the book. Actually made me like hurt inside seeing that, because I wouldn't know how to react in that situation. I wouldn't know how to react in a war anyways, especially not with something like that. Something else I'm glad they took note of was the personalities of Hindenburg and Foch. Ferdinand Foch was, I'm glad that they took notice of this. Hindenburg was historically very hard headed. He was very bullheaded about war. He was very bullheaded about the military. Paul von Hindenburg was not a diplomatic man, and I'm glad they took note of that. I'm glad they even included him in the movie. I'm glad there was a good touch adding Foch and Hindenburg in the movie, or any of the diplomats and military leaders of the French and German nations. I thought it was amazing that they included them, and they hit the nail on the head with both of their personalities. Hindenburg being very bullheaded about the military, not wanting to surrender, thinking of having that old mentality of, if you want to go home, you're a coward. If you don't want to win, you're a coward. And then Foch, with it's just, he was very brash. Foch was known as a very brash person that, like, when it came to war, he was either going to win or he wasn't. And if he was going to get his way. That's the way Foch was. And he wasn't very similar to Hindenburg in that way, because Foch knew how to accept defeat, but Foch also was not going to give any leniency to the Germans, and he didn't. And I'm glad that they noticed this in the movie. I'm glad they mentioned this in the movie whenever Foch is talking to the German diplomats. I thought it was amazing the way they dealt with that, with Foch not accepting a German fairness policy that the German diplomats were asking for. I thought that was a great thing to notice. Something else that you first see whenever they're going onto the train to start negotiations to sign the ceasefire armistice, and they show them later when they show the French trenches, was black French soldiers. I thought that was a great detail. I was wondering if they were going to show them. The Germans really didn't like having black soldiers. The British didn't really either. But the French were open to it. Things like French Senegal, a lot of their colonies in Africa, Madagascar, like these were real people, obviously, and they still are. I don't mean to demean that. That came out badly, but these were real people that fought in the war, and I'm so happy that they took notice of that. I'm so happy they took notice of the average French soldier participating in that. Having banter back and forth or conversation with these other, with these black French soldiers. I thought it was amazing to see, because there's a lot of times where people just don't want to capture that in film. So I thought that was a great addition. Something else is Paul actually has a death scene. Something I laughed about at the end of the book, or at the end of the movie, not the book, was that the book just kind of steers away from Paul. Paul is the last living member of his friend group, and then Paul just kind of dies in the book. He doesn't really have a death scene. He doesn't really have a death story. He just kind of dies. And I'm glad they gave him a proper death scene. And it was also during the showing of Hindenburg's kind of maniacal tendencies, kind of brash, bullheaded tendencies of attacking right before the end of the war. And then at the very end, it also loops around with the soldier, the fresh, brand new recruit going and grabbing the dog tag of Paul, which Paul does in the very beginning for his dead friends. Thought it was a great movie. My only issue with the movie, it was very small, very unnoticeable. It was a German movie, obviously. You see in the trailers that they're speaking in German in the English version of Netflix, which is the only thing you can watch on English Netflix, is the English version. So obviously sometimes you have some lip syncing issues when they're not speaking in their native language, which is most of the movie for the German soldiers. So you kind of, in some instances, have some weird lip syncing issues, but it's not going to pull you out of the movie. There's only a few instances where I noticed it. That's not even that big of a deal. Getting here on the 20-minute mark. This has been my review. I know some people asked me if I was going to do this. I absolutely am. Thank you guys for watching so much. I recommend this movie heavily if you have Netflix. If you don't have Netflix, find a friend that has Netflix. This movie was amazing. Go read the book. Go watch the movies. Go watch all the movies. There's three. This is the third one now. Go watch them. Brilliant movies. I loved it. Probably one of my favorite movies of all time now. Thank you guys. See you.